Hello, everyone. It is Monday night. It is 7 p.m. Eastern Time, which means it's time for another episode of Iron Culture presented by Mass. Tonight is a very special episode because in addition to your regular co-hosts, me and Dr. Helms, we are honored to have Dr. Eduardo De Souza here. He is a professor down at the University of Tampa. He did his PhD at the University of Sao Paulo, and we agreed. So, little context. I think 7 years ago, I did about 3 weeks worth of Duolingo learning Brazilian Portuguese, and that's true. But we got together beforehand and decided we're going to do this one in English, just so everyone's on the same page. So we're doing English tonight because it's been a while for me. But Dr. De Souza, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me on, guys. I'm really excited to be here. And yes, Brazilian Portuguese is way different from Portuguese from Portugal. But I'm gonna share my charming accent in English, so don't worry about it.
Perfect. Yeah, I learned very quickly that, Brazilian Portuguese and regular Portuguese, they were both well outside of my reach. For whatever reason, I just cannot learn languages. So it'll be English for a while here. But Dr. Helms, you are a legend. You have written so many Mass articles that have touched on Dr. De Souza's work and touched on the work that's cited in Dr. De Souza's work. So I am humbly going to pass the official pilot position over to Dr. Helms for this episode to kind of steer the ship bravely. But before we do that, let's make sure we get our housekeeping out of the way, the stuff we always got to do. If you like the show, you want to support it, make sure you like, rate, subscribe, review, send a link, share it with people, all that stuff. Subscribe to the Mass Research Review, become a member of the Mass community. That's big. If you want to see the entire Mass crew together for literally the first time ever, so that's a true thing that is almost impossible to imagine. The Mass Research Review started in 2017. There has never once been a time where the entire crew was together. And we're talking about a crew that has never been more than 4 people. So it is almost impossible to believe that that's true. But for the first time ever, the whole crew will be together at the Sports Nutrition Association Conference in Austin, Texas, April 12th and 13th this year. We are all speaking at the conference. So if you want to be part of the first ever Mass team meetup, all you got to do is buy a ticket and get yourself to Austin. It's that simple, Helms.
It is. It's that easy. I'm really looking forward to it. It'll be nice to actually meet. I've only not met Lauren in person because I've met everybody else. So that'll be a really cool experience. Lots of other great speakers as well. We've got, if you're into the academia, we got Sean Arendt. If you're into the history of online coaching, the very first online coach, especially in the natural bodybuilding scene, Dr. Joe Klimaszewski. If you're into nutrition, science, communication, nobody does it better than Danny Lennon from Sigma Nutrition Radio, our frenemy over on that podcast. We've also got Lauren Conlin, we've got Gabrielle Fundero, and we've got one of the most prolific and popular YouTubers who are in the space, communicating science to a very broad population, which is, as much as we sometimes get frustrated with how science communication goes, it's a good problem that we have something to critique at all, because Jeremy Etier, he's going to be presenting there, and he's got, just over 7 million subscribers, which is, honestly, I look back 20 years ago, never thought it would be possible. So there's so many people to learn from, and we're really excited to do that. But
yeah,
all of that
Helms,
sales.
I should mention,
yes, go ahead.
You've never met Lauren, something you should be ready for. She's very self-conscious about it. She doesn't talk about it. She's 6'11", so do not make a big deal about her height when you meet her, okay?
Okay, got it. I knew she was tall. I mean, she has those tall vibes, but that is taller than tall.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what. All right. Well, okay, enough shameless self-promotion. I just want to first say a big thank you to Dr. De Souza for coming on, taking the time from his busy, real full-time academic position while we social media PhDs just pretend. No, but in all seriousness, it's really great to have you on. One of the things that we talked about that I thought would be really helpful for the audience is to get more context on some of the higher volume research, because while higher volumes are all the rage, and they kind of have been for a while, out of the total proportion of research on volume, it's a little bit weak in terms of, say, sets over 20 per week in the traditional counting method. But the only reason it is not completely weak is because labs like yours have done a lot of this work. So I thought it'd be really great for you to give us, a bit of your background, why this is interesting to you, and then talk to us a bit about the research that you've done. Some of it having just come out in the last couple months on high volume so that people can get better insights into this area of research.
No, yeah, great. Again, thanks for having me on, guys. Really excited to be here. And really short background about myself. Again, I came from Brazil. I came to do my postdoc here. We did a study, was in collaboration with Mike Roberts. When we published at PLOS One. So yeah, my master's was about concurrent training with muscle biopsies, those kind of things, and muscle growth. And back in 2000, that was 2010, I guess. No, that was before that. In my master's, we had that idea that potentially the cardio would hurt the hypertrophic gains. So the idea was to look at this type of research. So after that, doing my PhD, and something I shared on different podcasts I participated, the idea was to use a gold standard method for measuring hypertrophy, comparing no periodized with daily undulating periodization versus traditional periodization. And the main idea behind the project was looking at the sensitivity of anabolic signaling pathways. So each participant had 4 biopsies. We had a power outrage in São Paulo. I lost all the samples. That's the reason I only published in my data. Yes, Trexler, that was, I cried, man. It was, because I remember going to my mentor's office in Carlos. I was doing data collection for 2 years, and like, Carlos, I'm done. I cannot do that anymore. Biopsies on the weekend, MRIs on the weekends, training participants. So, but the idea would be so cool. Would be like a different training load scheme affect anabolic signaling pathway. So we had like a baseline, acute, and acute chronic biopsy. So it was 4 biopsies. So again, I always was into the resistance training. I always ask myself, like, why am I studying hypertrophy? It's like it's something that we still have so much unknowns about it, and that challenging. Like, I have the feeling sometimes I think we still, not being dramatic, I think we are scratching the surface still when it comes to hypertrophy. Everybody knows about it. It's a very interesting subject to study. So, and yeah, once I finished my grad school, so I came here. The plan was to stay 1 year in Tampa. So then they invited me to teach a grad course in the master's program, which I'm the director of the program now. So then I started to do the first research. That it was when I came across with a mass. The first research done here in the lab was the auto-regulation. I would call totally different now, Helms, but was the auto-regulation exercise selection.
Mm-hmm.
That was, yes. And Roche, yeah, such great. We did a Roche, Tanuj. I miss that Chris Barakat was the team I had here in the past. So that was the first study. We put it together here. I would redo a lot of things different now, but was kind of the study that has a special place in my heart, because it was the first study here as a professor working at UT. So always about those things, that how manipulating training variables, does that enhance, maximize muscle growth? Always that question. And now I keep studying, and like if it does something, the difference might be so small that might be not relevant. I don't know. I keep joking I'm getting grumpier and older, and I don't look at the data the way I used to. So way more excited. I was more naive as well. I think that's part of the process. And when we started to study volume, the first study here was the All Bay paper. And it was interesting because, and again, that's something I started studying the way that, man, when you talk about study training people, in my opinion, not accounting for previous training volume, it would be a confounding variable. And we're not accounting for that because one guy is doing 25 sets, and now he's putting the group for 12. So he dropped pretty much 100%. He cut by the half his volume at this point. And the first study was, okay, let's track what they're doing before, and then you're going to randomize based upon the previous training volume. The idea for that project always was everybody going to start from the same start line. So the baseline volume is going to be the same for everybody. And we knew the problem would be the guys reducing their previous volume would be a secondary project, which was the Andrews Barshun paper we published last December. The idea was, okay, let's account for the previous training volume in two different ways. So the first one was about randomized people based upon the previous training volume. So if you look between the groups, 12, 18, 24, they all have an average on 12 sets per week for quads. And meanwhile, while we were doing that paper, Scarpelli paper was published from my dear friend Clayton Libard. We are working together on a project. I can share a few things later. And then I talked to him like, man, that's my second project. Is about now no one is going to reduce the volume. They're going to maintain. They're going to increase 30% or 60%. Meanwhile, I met Tom Ennis and then Alison he invited me to, so how I got involved for the infamous 52 weekly sets paper. Alison invited me to be, that was his master project, and he published at Medicine Science, Sport, Exercise.
That's impressive for a master's project.
Yeah.
Actually do a long-term longitudinal trial. That's tough.
When he invited me, and I told, literally like, kid, are you up to this challenge? That's a lot of work. And it's like, no, if you help me. And I talked to his mentor. So he invited me to be on his thesis committee. Then I made a few comments and like, hey, I'm doing here in this way. Let's try to account for previous volume in a different way so we can have a similar standardization between the labs. And then you can try to tackle the problem from different perspectives. So then Addison, what he does on the two projects is a washout period, which each individual reduces the previous training volume, followed by 2 weeks increase, kind of acclimatization with the training. Then they go for 12 weeks training. So just training, you talk about 16 weeks. So the 52 weekly sets. And the last one with the women, just for 2 weeks washout, 2 weeks acclimatization, plus 12 weeks. So that was the idea. Try to account for a potential confounding variable. And I don't know if that confounding variable gets diluted to the lab effect and the high intensity they train. Because again, when I look the Barshun's paper and like those guys doing on average 12, they grew substantial muscle size as well. But again, they were training such an effort level that probably they were not doing by themselves. So again, the idea is always try to understand muscle growth. That I keep studying the subject, and I have more questions now than 10 years ago. So that's how I got into hypertrophy research and interesting about volume. So we are doing one more project now. Is a retrospective study. We have so I submitted to European Congress. We have 175 participants.
Wow.
The idea, we have a data. It's not a meta study, but like I said, as we do the things in the very similar way, because we coordinate the efforts between the labs. Okay, let's look at variables that we did not present or use in statistical modeling. and try to see the data from a different perspective. Then Clayton, I had so the co-authors is me, Alison, his mentor, Clayton Libard, Scarpelli. So we started a conversation, was interesting, and now it became such a big monster. I don't recall who was the idea, but hey, let's see if even the study design changes the precision of the estimate, in this case, hypertrophy, because Clayton has so many intra-subject studies. So you also want to, besides accounting for these different weight studies in different ways, similar we do for a meta-analysis, we also want to see if the type of design might change the precision of the estimate. Again, the project keeps growing. I submitted such tiny parts for European Congress with interesting findings. But yeah, so I keep trying to answer the questions, and I don't know if I'd be too pretentious. I try to advance the field. That's what I'm trying to do.
No, it's not pretentious. That's all of our jobs. And I think some of the things that I really appreciate about your content when you talk about it online is you emphasize things that I think, to our field's credit, Trex, and I hope you agree, are starting to become talked about because they're becoming increasingly relevant. And that is measurement error, sampling error or sampling variance, sample size, and statistical power. And in our last episode, we talked a lot about this in context to long muscle length training as well as protein. And I still think protein is probably the best example because there's so much contention around volume. There's so much contention around long muscle lengths, but everybody's on the protein train. It's just a question of how many cars are on that train. Are you buying the first class tickets? Are you hedging your bets closer to 1.5 grams per kilogram or closer to 2.5 like us crazy people? But the thing is, so few of the studies on protein actually show significant differences in favor of the higher protein groups. But we've got meta-analysis and regressions going back more than 5 years now that all seem to indicate, yeah, we've got this diminishing returns response relationship, higher protein intakes are better, but we're looking at a standardized effect that is small at best. And I think that's probably also what we're observing with the high volume research. And I think you've done a very good job of getting people to kind of pump the brakes a little bit and consider that just because technically, 20 plus sets might be better than say 10 or 15, the quantification of how much better, over what time course, and whether it's even something relevant for most populations. Now, for me, I get on stage naked and flex, and I call that a sport. So yeah, I'm willing to hedge my bets towards, harder work to get a lower return on investment. But I think for population level health and even just general athletes who only have so much time to train, hypertrophy is at best a mechanism to help them perform better. Or people who are looking at, hey, I'm a father, I have a full-time job, I'm interested in health, I do like lifting weights, and I do want to get the most out of it. But if you tell me that I can get 80% of my gains doing 1/3 of the work of what's going to maximize it, I will take that every time. And I think that message is one that has not been delivered well enough in the past. So I appreciate that you have been a part of that conversation.
No, thank you. Yes, but again, did you notice, Trexler, he was comparing him to me, a dad, full-time job, getting fatter, not too much time to work out. Anyway,
I never said the words getting fatter.
I saw your anyway.
Yeah, no, I picked up on that too. He basically said it. Yeah, basically said it.
I am a very insulting person. You're right.
We don't want to go to that debate. I think bodybuilding is a sport. It has organization, it has anti-doping and competitive schedule. That's sport, in my opinion.
You are welcome back anytime on Iron Culture from now on. That's all you had to do.
Of course, the criteria for evaluation very subjective and hell, but it is a sport. It has competitive schedule, anti-doping, for natural, right? It has organization. That's sport. But anyway, for example, I can do several different measurements for hypertrophy, And I chose the simplest, the most simple, which is just draw a straight line. Because when I started to study that population, I noticed like, man, looking at relative change, like a percentage wise, I'm looking at 1-digit change. So I need to be very good. And my measurement, and that's something I take proud. I have reporting pictures from the measurements and measurement error from the last 10 years. I put the pictures, I report measurement error. And was something that for the last paper was one of the best reviews, the one that we published in Journal of Applied Physiology, was one of the best and strongest. I said that in another podcast, was the first time I had a review that made me study, and I love it. And is again, it's the longest limitation section I ever written in my life. And those limitations apply to 99% of studies in our field, but people keep holding back. Like, guys, we need to, if we talk about this, we can advance and make the things better. So, and when I did, like, again, power analysis, I never done before that study because I was like, man, I knew I need way more participants I'm using here. I'm doing that for a while. I can play the G power game and make the reviewer happy. I can do that.
Yeah.
So then,
what do I need to see a large effect, which we will not see? Just 10. Yeah.
This is it. So yeah. And Trexler, we did the power analysis. I did a very robust power analysis for that effect size, and I published the paper mentioning I would need 300 people to detect significance.
Yeah, no. To your point, what everyone does is they report a massive Cohen's F effect size in a field where no one has ever reported a Cohen's F effect size in the results, and they just say, "Yeah, we figured we'd see a massive effect, and we needed 21 people." So
yeah,
there you go.
We all know that. And again, I was so proud when I published that paper. I think was the most mature papers, probably because it's the last. Now is the second last because Allison came out, but from my lab, that's the last paper. And again, like, it's a very extensive limitation section, and also we pointed out like for this type of effect, which I think Max with a James Steele work pointed out we need 300 people for. And again, but nobody talks about. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, and then we can advance the field. So I started to not get mad, but like we need to talk more about those things. And I feel bad because we know, right? Sometimes like you are in the podcast and was pointed out a few things about the meta regression from Josh, and people gonna use that to attack the guys. And when I talk about that, it's not personal. It's my perspective on the field. And then we can make people aware and other researchers as well. And we together can make, again, I agree, I'm not that optimistic, but I think we are so much better placed compared to 10 years ago in research. We are reporting better. We still have a long way to go, but are reporting better. I think as a scientist, I think we are presenting better our project. Yes, science communication, social media is a different thing, right? But I think we're doing better. But talk about sampling variance, talk about measurement error, talk about all those things that impact nearly every study in hypertrophy. It is important. And you and I have a different. I keep pointing out that we are doing meta studies with low quality RCTs. So, but I do think we can see some pattern with a meta analysis when they are well conducted. And I think I mentioned, for example, I love the meta regression. There are some choices I pointed out. I not saying I'm right, they're wrong, and vice versa. We as a scientist, we deal with scientific choices, and you gotta justify them. But that work, I think the field would benefit from a methodological paper comparing the direct, indirect approach, why does it not fit the model, those kind of things, and then another paper with the actual outcomes. I think that would be a nice work for the field. again, analysis, they pretty much is an invitation to reflect on the field up to the point it was published. And then we can talk about where we can go, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm glad, by the way, that you mentioned James Steele, because our last episode, Helms alluded to this. We were about 75 minutes into a chat about sampling variance and measurement error. And I thought to myself, this is devastating for our business, first of all. But second of all, this is basically now just a podcast for James Steele. And he actually messaged me the day after. He did listen. So we nailed it. We were going for an audience of one, and we got him.
Got it.
So I just want to let Helms know that at least one person enjoyed that episode.
And unlike research, we actually sampled the entire population that we were looking to study.
You're correct.
So you actually brought up something that I think I do want to talk about. One of the common things we see in science communication right now, and I think it mirrors kind of the general distrust in society that started in COVID, has always been there, but got exacerbated, of a distrust of authority and even a distrust of science and its integrity, has been the questioning of the legitimacy of research findings online. And a common thing when something doesn't agree with someone's biases is that they apply a much higher level of skepticism, rigor, and critique to a paper that is contrary to their beliefs compared to something that aligns with it. And this is especially problematic when you have people who don't realize their level of, I'll say ignorance, but I don't mean that in a negative connotation. Like, why would you know these specific things we're talking about unless you were a researcher? So we have people who are informed enough to read a study, but perhaps not enough to critique its methods or critique its stats, who are now having questions about whether, but these folks are not training close to failure. They're not being observed. Certainly you can't do that much volume unless you are sandbagging in some way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, of course, if we actually do surveys of bodybuilders, the majority of them do 18 to 24 sets in a week. So this is actually not that uncommon in certain areas. But I can understand why the typical person is going, oh, this is crazy to be doing twice that amount of volume. They are thinking about it from a day-to-day perspective rather than building up to it or doing it for 12 weeks or 8 weeks. And they also are not aware of a lot of the methods. So there's, questions around, is this all edema? Is this measurement error? Or is there even just bad actors? The thing about it is people are a lot of the times just repeating what other people say. Like there was a point where the NS study that you were a part of, people thought it was a study by Schoenfeld. And I would consistently have people go, oh, the 52-set study by Schoenfeld. I'm like, that was not Schoenfeld's study. Like someone online is critiquing a high volume paper and you're just saying, oh, a high volume paper must be Schoenfeld. And I'm just repeating what that person said. And I mean, that's the level of, and then it gets just endlessly repeated. And I had to correct people like, that's not a paper by it. And we even had a podcast episode saying why the 52-set study doesn't matter, which probably pissed you off. But the reason why we had,
I need to listen to one.
The whole reason that we titled it that way was because people also get way too hung up on single studies and they're not following the overall trends in the research. And this was kind of this turning point where everyone went, oh my God, we can't even trust science because this study did it this way. So I guess what I want to ask you, Dr. De Souza, is as someone who has conducted or been a part of 4 or more such studies where people are doing in excess of 20 sets, talk to us about what's the participant experience like? How many people just go, thanks, but no thanks, participant information sheet back in your hands, I'm leaving? How many people drop out? How often do you think people are sandbagging the RIR target or the failure target? How much validity is there to some of the critiques of the lack of sustainability of this type of volume?
Oh man, you touch on so many cool points, and your question is great. Yes, I think I got it. Why the 52 weekly sets doesn't matter, because again, we keep repeating that one study alone does not carry the weight to change practical applications, and we got to account for limitations. And again, and that goes back to another thing you mentioned, the selective criticisms we see, right? People, depends on the findings, and they are more critical, or they're gonna, undermine limitations, and that's what you're supposed to do. Was very interesting. I don't join those debates and comments, but I think was about the I think it was about the women study, and someone was criticizing using the Andrews Barshum paper from my lab to, like, you see, and like, but we have a people doing 40 sets in the 60 percent group, and also in the control, and they didn't have a more edema, they didn't grow more. So why? What you see, like, is they're selective because quite often we're not talking about science, we talk about coach. We have the low volume coach, we have the high volume coach. And I think it's right. Like, I can talk about you, me. We are not preaching, hey, you got to do high volume is the best, or only do low volume. We're not preaching. We try to understand the interaction, the dose response relationship. That's what we're trying to do here. So, and you also touch on something really, really important, that the build up over time is not they started, especially the Ennis paper, right? They started with 22 weekly sets, and they were kind of doing that. For example, they were doing that the previous study was close to that. Some people a little more, a little less, and then every other 2 weeks they were increasing 4 or 6 sets. And regardless the group, if you look the regression line for the volume progression, the first week's a little more steady because yes, they got sore. The first week of training, everybody got sore because we pushed them to, come on, you have a more than 2 in the tank, keep going. And that's why we always do the last one to failure, because if the target range, the target rep range is 8 to 12, and the first session, the last set supposed to be to failure, the guy did 17 to failure, we're going to increase the weight for the next. And then at the session number 2, we are there. Like, now we are 2 in reserve, and the last one now is to failure. So again, they got sore the first week of training, naturally, because the level of effort, the way they were training before, but then they were building up. And then his strength was we are progressing. If you look at his paper, the 3 groups increased the volume load because they were progressing. And they were training hard. Yes, some guys at the end were drained out of energy. They were tired. They were saying very nice name to us. Sometimes we get to get that, right? They dropped the bath bomb in Portuguese all the time. But again, they progressed. They improved. And usually we have one research assistant or 2 by the participant pushing them to do what they're supposed to do. We do the consort diagram flow. Usually the dropout rate is not way different. It varies, right? We know that 20-30% is a good number. I can say that for volume studies, I haven't seen very close to 30. I had a huge dropout with the study from Andrew because the second leg was, we did one entry point was the fall before COVID. Then we shut down in the mid. So you're doing the second semester data collection. We shut down the project. When you resume, people are still getting infected. We lost a lot of people. So we test, and we had 53 people who started the training, and we ended up with 29. And again, like, I test 53. They started. And again, like, going back to the measurement error, with the term every entry data, I calculate measurement error for every semester we start data collection. I never like, oh, that's measurement error from my lab from 10 years ago and check it. No. Now the sleeping study, That's the second semester. We determine again measurement error for the things we're gonna measure. But yes, that thing about edema and it does not, again, we cannot completely dispute the edema, but what we know already is the opposite. It's very unlikely than likely that edema is gonna inflate. And again, that would be systematic across high volume studies, right? We would debunk repeated bout effect, forget about repeated bout effect. And paper from Damas, when they did the cluster analysis with, again, the best indirect CK is indirect measurement, which is so messy measurement. It varies all the time. You got a log transformation to be able to analyze. It's crazy. The best indirect measurement of damage is strength. If you have a damage, you cannot recruit fibers. And again, they improved. So the last progression took place about 17 weeks before we measured the hypertrophy for the 52 weekly sets. And the last progression, when they went from 46 to 52, I never do math in public. We'll talk about 12% increase, right? It's a 12% increase in trained people. Then they trained for 2 more weeks, and edema was there, right? Edema was a ghost present, inflating the measurement. Is again, the data tells otherwise. But goes back to the selective criticism with when the research finding does not align for someone beliefs, because I talk about beliefs is like a code, right? It's a low volume code, high volume code. I don't know if I answered everything you asked, but
no, it was great.
So many things that's very interesting, and yes, that
I think you touched on a lot of great things, and I think I love that people ask the question. I should say I love when people ask the question, could this be edema? I'm not a huge fan of, without any evidence, claiming that it must be edema because it doesn't comport with my prior beliefs. And that's what I've seen a lot of. And an example of that selective criticism is when we look at data that does show differences in muscle damage, most of it is training to failure or not to failure in relatively low to moderate protocols. And when we look at data that looks at the time course of recovery from that edema and how long it takes, there was actually a really cool study that Dr. Martin Ruffalo did as part of his PhD. And one of the things we did was we looked at a 48-hour and then a 6-day post-measurement in well-trained individuals doing individualized level of volume, many of them over 20 sets. And we saw almost perfect agreement between those two time points, indicating that, hey, if we need to wait longer than 6 days to actually start seeing hypertrophy go down, at that point, we're probably actually losing muscle. And furthermore, this doesn't just apply to high volume studies. You're basically saying, I don't like where research is going, so I want to throw out all research because that is a limitation that persists across the whole thing. And I tell you what, that's not an uncommon strategy. Once research starts to conflict with my ideas, I'm just going to poison the well. I'm going to say the researchers are bad actors. I'm going to say that there is systematic error and bias that invalidates everything. And
whatever.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, and Trex, you could speak to this, if that was the case, if there was a lot of research that was coming out that was truly false and manipulated and systematically skewed towards something, one of the other benefits of a properly done meta-analysis is we'd start to see some funky things in those sensitivity analyses. We'd start to see some things not looking right, and we would start to see effects that confounded things. But it's kind of harder to even make a dent if you are a bad actor these days, now that we are moving into some of these meta-science techniques that, like you said, there's critiques there, and we need to be improving the quality of RCTs that we are meta-analyzing in the first place. But that should pop up. Am I wrong, Trex, that at this point, now that we're doing these meta-studies, we would be also aware of when things really look contrary to the main findings?
Yeah, I mean, and there's more than a couple metas out there where you say, hey, there's this one lab group that seems to have a lot of effect sizes above 3, and no one else is above 1. So that's weird. So yeah, that stuff comes out, and like what I do find is the more people know about metascience, the more I mean, I don't know, virtually like every person I interact with in research is like somewhere between obsessive and paranoid about just high quality data. But I think once people start to understand meta-analysis, they realize like, oh, like not only is this important for a million other reasons, but like you will be caught with your pants down if you're just like going out making stuff up. That's, not unless you're good at making stuff up, like it's gonna look really odd in the literature. But yeah, I mean, these are the kind of things that kind of kill me. Like any good scientist, so like Dr. De Souza, you measure a lot of hypertrophy, and hypertrophy is surprisingly not super simple to measure, So Helms, you've been arguing on the internet in the comments for the last several days about, we publish a meta-regression about protein and fat-free mass.
I have been respectfully discussing the difference between lean mass and hypertrophy with the great Professor Stu Phillips. So to be clear, in case he is listening, since we do know that people like Dr. Steele are talking, to be clear.
Hey, well, you've been in there. You've been calling people dummies and all that stuff. Not Stu, but other people. I see what you're doing on there.
This has never happened, and you know it.
No, I didn't
anyway.
do that. Yeah, no.
Yeah, he probably should more.
He should. Yeah, I agree.
Sometimes, not with Stu, but
No,
but anyway,
yeah.
But no. So like, when things are hard to measure as a scientist, like you have to acknowledge, like, listen, I don't think this is edema. I can't say for certain it's not. Here's the literature indicating why I don't believe that's really a plausible justification. Like, we could measure hypertrophy looking at muscle thickness, cross-sectional area, fiber, cross-sectional area. There's all these different ways to look at it. And a good scientist will give a pretty measured and nuanced discussion of, I'm aware of the different measurement pros and cons. Here's the one we go with for the following reasons. And, this is something we go through. The work I do at Duke has a lot to do with exercise energy compensation. And we still have a really difficult time really nailing down exactly where these missing calories are going. So we try to measure resting metabolic rate. We measure total daily energy expenditure with doubly labeled water. We could bring it in and do thermic effective feeding for a meal or two here and there. We could try to bring it into a metabolic chamber for 24, 36 hours, but then you're like a hamster in a little box here, and that's not how many calories you normally burn. Like in our area, we also have this thing going on where we produce a finding. Inevitably, some number of people do not like it. And then they say, you're an idiot. You measured it wrong. Here's what really happened. And I will never understand the hubris of the internet commenter who's like, Dr. De Souza's been studying hypertrophy since his master's, which he got in 2010 in Sao Paulo. And I bet he didn't think of this. I bet he has no idea how to measure hypertrophy, and he doesn't even know edema exists. But if I go in the comment section, boy, am I going to enlighten him, and he might change his whole life based on this. He's going to realize he wasted, 25 years since your master's? Like,
yeah,
that kind of confidence.
15, but yeah,
15. Okay, you never do math in public.
We lost 10 years in COVID.
I completely lost my sense of time, but it just kills me that you'll jump into the comment section and people are like, I bet this guy's never heard of edema. I'm going to go ahead and enlighten him on that. If you could buy that level of confidence, put me on the list. I'll pay anything.
And the people who criticize it, they never measure hypertrophy. They don't know how to measure it, but hey, they crack the code, and we are doing something wrong. Yes, it is the effective reps model, is the edema, they keep vomiting. Sorry, pardon my French, but it is off sometimes. I'm not. Yeah, that's why I don't join those discussions, because
you're a better man for it.
Yeah. No, and it's I'll throw Helms a bone here. It is, in totality, the net impact. It is good that there is vigorous, robust debate about the stuff we're doing. that is the most you can ask for, is to be doing research that anyone cares about. Because I can tell you what, I know a lot of people who do research I do not care about. Like I've been to some talks on campuses where I go, I cannot believe a person spends at least 40 hours a week on this topic, but more power to you. But we really are lucky to be studying exercise, nutrition, the kind of thing when you walk into a party, you walk into a gathering, people want to know what you're finding. You know what I mean? Like that really is a privilege. And if the small downside is sometimes people on the internet call us an idiot and tell us we don't know things we do know, that's okay. We can kind of, either opt out of that conversation or take the Helms route and diplomatically explain, well, that could be the case, but it probably isn't because of this, but we're more inclined to think it's the following. So at the end of the day, it's good that people care. It's good that people are staying up to date with the research. And it's good that people like Helms respond to more comments than I do, because I might be less diplomatic.
Yeah, I try to do my part.
I just want to echo you both. Yes, it's great to making questions. We scientists, we are doubters. We do make questions. We submit the work. We get questions. We review others people's work. We make questions. That's totally fine. But like Eric said, right? The problem is like Helmut said, the problem is when people are making questions because it must be edema because I don't like the outcome of the study. So then I'm gonna throw something in and talk about the scientist's integrity or something like that. Attacking, it makes me mad, especially when they're attacking young, talented people that, again, they're trying to learn and grow. But they crack the code and you're here doing everything wrong.
Yeah, and I will say that that's the one element that I, at this point in my career, cannot empathize with. So I have been called an idiot. Actually, my undergraduate thesis, there were at least 2 blog posts about how stupid I am because it was about a kind of a controversial topic. So I know all about that game and I'm fine with it. But I've never had the situation where I was mentoring a doc student or a master's student and they finally published their first lead author paper, and then people on the internet are calling them a fraud or a dummy or whatever the case is. So I feel like I would take that a lot worse than if someone's calling me an idiot, because frankly, I tend to agree with the people who call me an idiot. But yeah, when you have like a young person who how vulnerable they are because it's their first paper and they're so excited, they did a great job, and people are, attacking their integrity or, attacking their ability level, I could see how that would really, really be much, much tougher to handle.
Yeah, I keep telling there are so many similarities between being a dad and mentor, professor. It hurts you if they talk about your students, man, like about your kids. And yes, it is. I can empathize with that as well. Like, is everyone, again, human beings and studies, they all deserve grace, and we can't, and they don't care attacking people just to prove they're right and we scientists are wrong. I don't like this part of social media.
Yeah.
Well, now that we've done the scientist apology tour and martyrdom, we've martyred ourselves so well. I feel pretty special. Let's talk about some things related to your findings. So the general perception now is that more volume, if you can recover from it, and it doesn't seem to be negatively impacting performance or leading to injury or burnout, is probably a good thing for hypertrophy. Now, you have conducted studies not only comparing groups that are higher versus lower volume, but also the progression of volume. And you've also compared this in both women and men. And you've also been able to get kind of the anecdotal word on the ground, the qualitative experiences from these participants. Because one thing that I sometimes think is worth commenting on is that we rarely do like exit surveys of studies. And I have done this in a few studies. We did actually my very first student that I mentored, who I was on his master's thesis committee, did a case series on weightlifters and powerlifters and had them go on a borderline ketogenic diet. And then it was mixed methods. One of the things we asked them on the way out was, would you do this on your own? And if so, how would you modify it? And despite some people getting what would be described as pretty decent results in terms of body composition change while maintaining performance, all of them said they would do something to change it. So it wasn't necessarily worth it to them. And the difference between looking more jacked and getting a 10% improvement in muscle thickness are miles apart. So I would love to hear from your perspective, despite what may be reported in the papers or reported in the current meta-regression, what is your take on volume and how to apply it, considering all those factors, Dr. De Souza?
Oh, man. That's a question. It is like everything that's linear in human physiology, correct me if I'm wrong, is linear until a certain point, right? It plateaus after a while. Can you say that?
I would agree.
I think everything you talk about it, and that's how now I keep approaching volume. Like
even blood pressure, it'll go up until something ruptures, and then it'll plateau, and you will flatline. Yeah,
and I keep, and again, like when I see the studies, again, with all sampling variance considering, everything else considering, as we talking as a group more, and I know the way you're not saying you're doing better, but the way you communicate and the way we are looking at the data. For example, the absolute change in the 52 weekly sets is similar to the all-basic study with a way fewer sets, for example. That indicates to me, but there are other factors, and then I'm going to answer you just to give you some context. And that tells me that, yeah, maybe until certain points we increase volume, we get out more benefit. But when I have studies with 12 to 24 with a similar effect size or absolute change compared to 52 weekly sets progression, that tells me something. And that was the way I look at the Josh data, because it shows the dose response when and again, we talk about only studies for trained people. They analyze everybody together, but it shows that you get a more hypertrophy until a certain point, and then it plateaus almost. It's always linear, right? But anyway, so when it comes to trained people, I think above certain volume, you don't have there is a diminishing returns for sure. And maybe the difference, the question I keep making, and again, it might be subjective for someone being naked flexing on the podium. Yes, that point whatever centimeters is important. And again, I value anecdotes, I value experience, but just trying to understand that dose response relationship. So again, that always calls my attention that when I look at our 40 studies individually, we have a huge variance in our training people in again, women versus more or less trained, and the effect sizes and the absolute change are not so different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's is like, okay, so should the people, I think is a feasible option. Like if you have tried something, I think I would put some stock on, okay, I have tried so many different approaches. Why not have a specialization phase for that storable muscle, whatever? That's an option. I keep telling, like, and I wanna touch on something that, my opinion, maybe come up with a design to try to understand that, because. But again, let's go back to the. So I think that when you look at those studies, like for example, Brigato and Schofield, they clearly show those response. Right? They show more volume is better. When you look at the absolute, yes, Brad is the one that's a little higher, but it's still feasible in my opinion compared to effect sizes and absolute change. But those two guys they were weaker. If you look at 1 rep max body mass ratio, they they have a way lower compared to Anne's study, Albay, and Andrew Barshon. So does baseline strength impact? The data I'm presenting on European conference said something about it. And then like, should you start to think about that? That's a big question, right? Like how, and again, as I keep telling you, are scratching surface, we are holding everything constant and just manipulating weekly sets. What about the distribution, the volume allocation, the strength, the baseline strength? There are so many things we still not able to account for when we are studying volume. So, and again, when I look at Anne's study, the 52 weekly sets, the 1 rep max body mass ratio 1.7, Albay 2.05, Andrew 1.9 something, and the magnitude for those studies are smaller compared to some other studies with weaker counterparts. And if you look at, again, if you look at the moderator analysis without the issues, we know all the issues for moderator analysis, yes. But if you want to look at from a more not subjective, I don't know if that's the right word, but when you compare the graph for everybody combined with trained individuals, it kind of aligns with my data. The magnitude, the effect gets smaller.
Yeah.
So now answer your question is, in my opinion, every study that comes out when it's well conducted does not prove someone is right or wrong, does not prove other study is wrong. It gives you another possibility, another opportunity, another way to apply a science. You have a toolbox. If I keep using that analogy, like each study when well conducted is a tool for your toolbox. And then with a more study, the toolbox are getting bigger. You don't have a room for put a new box. You're not going to throw away. You buy a new toolbox and keep adding. So the studies give us perspectives, general possibilities. And I think based on the data, I would not say it's waste of time going high volume. I think it's an option there. My biggest question is when you talk about what is significant from what is relevant from a practical standpoint is where I keep because that's subjective. I agree, right? Your example for that 0.3 centimeters makes a difference for a competitive athlete. It's fine, but what about the cost benefit to get there and spend way more time for a dad like me with a full-time job? So I think is based on the studies we have, based on the data we have at this point, high volume, yes, it can be one more tool in your box. I think it's worth it. And if I would apply high volumes intervention to myself, would be a slow progression rather than going from 10 weekly sets to 52, right? And some people do that. I think the data tells, and consider another big problem with our field, right? Studies are underpowered. Everybody knows that. Studies are very short, right? It's just a snap. It's a short snapshot from someone like how long have been training, Eric? 2 decades, right? Or 1.5, something like that. So again,
I'm old.
2 decades. Because you look way younger than me, but anyway. So
that's because I've been training for those 2 decades. Fortunately, yeah.
I'm training for 2 decades. Come on, don't say that.
Well, and I'm also maybe a little bit younger. So yeah.
I've actually been training for over 2 decades as well, because I like got obsessed with lifting when I was 12. So my decade number is always going to be like, how does that work? But you don't get a lot of 12-year-olds who are like pounding the gym watching Arnold Schwarzenegger videos. But
that's why we love you, Dr. Me. No, these are fantastic points, Dr. De Souza. And I think one thing I wanted to highlight out of what you said is the length of the studies, as well as the difference between trained, quote unquote trained, and also untrained. Because untrained is clear, but trained is a huge spectrum from, last semester I started lifting weights and I barely meet the entry criteria for your study versus, and look at that, Trexler, volunteered for your study because he's on campus too, just working across the hall. And those people would both be in the same group, and they're going to get randomized to 2 different groups. And if it's a small sample size, here we go. So one of the things I think we always have to ask ourselves when interpreting research is, what should I expect? Or what do I expect with my current understanding of the data? And I think sometimes people look a little too dichotomously, and kind of one versus the other, when they think about trained versus untrained. And they think, oh, well, does that mean that trained people don't respond as well to high volume? And to channel my inner James Steele, no, it just means trained people don't respond. At least not in the 8 to 12 week time period we anticipate. Even when you do everything right and you stack the chips as well as you can, we're often looking at 50% of the change in terms of just the raw percentage change in many hypertrophy studies. And when you look at observational research on trained individuals, where they're not getting any potential benefit of the lab effect, the change in variables, and you think about the mind state that a trained person is in when they typically participate in this study, they're ready to go. Maybe they're coming off a deload. Most of the time, they're going to be like, no, things are going well right now. I'm not going to go to your lab and train. And I think those things probably do create a systematic difference. So I often ask myself, over what time frame do I think doing everything right, I would anticipate that the average quote-unquote well-trained person would have a measurable change in this outcome? And then I have to think back to, okay, then is this study going to capture it? And if it doesn't, that doesn't mean that there's no effect of the protocol. It just means that the effect size might be potentially too small for us to measure with the measurement error, which goes right back to why it's important to do these multi-site data collections to establish not only what is a significant change, but what is a measurable change, and then what might be a meaningful change, because those may be 3 distinct numbers. So those are all really, really good points. And I think I'm excited for the future, because I don't think we're far off. Trex, imagine this, that instead of having just these meta-analyses and meta-regressions that come out that kind of tend to shift the perspective on things, that maybe like some other fields, we had these constantly updated meta-regressions where we had like grade level, like criteria to it, and there was a working group that would update them on a regular basis. So you could just cite the 2025 or 2026 or 2027 version, and we watch those uncertainty values shrink. I think we're not far off from that, and I think that's going to become easier and easier with code. And the availability of it. And now, because right now I do think if 3 more studies were published on volumes above, say, 25 sets, it could change, that some of the kind of the far right aspects of that meta regression, graph. And I'm not sure which way it'll go, but that's kind of the point.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm quite as optimistic as you in the short term, but
just generally you're not. Yeah.
Well, that's true. No, I like the flavor of concept that you're putting out into the universe. To Dr. De Souza's point previously, like he mentioned, and I totally agree, our field is so much better at reporting our results than when I entered the field in like 2012. That's a lot of progress in a short time. But what it also means is that the vast majority of original studies going into these giant meta-analysis projects are very poorly reported. So I do think it's going to take some time, not just to like put together the infrastructure to make this type of like living kind of meta-analysis project, but I also do think, to be totally candid, we need probably another decade of putting our nose down and generating original data that is actually reported sufficiently, and or those data sets are made available, because that's also a trend that's picking up. So I like the vibe that you're putting out, but I think my time horizon's a little longer than yours, because I do think that there's literally decades worth of research that are reported so poorly that we really aren't going to be able to squeeze out nuance when there's just not enough nuance reported to really do that. But yeah, I do think, to Dr. De Souza's point, the field has really come along in a very short period of time. And so all that stuff is going to be on the menu and is going to be feasible in the near future. But I think we do. And one other thing that is kind of hindering our ability to get there, Helms, if I may, is the troubling trend in the last 5 to 8 years where like our field decided that original research was out of style and we're all doing meta-analyses of like 4 studies at a time because
that was mostly just called COVID. I think surveys also exploded. That's kind of the covariate.
It was going on a little before COVID though. But anyway, we can get to the empirical data and figure out exactly how much we want to blame COVID. But I do think, like I said, we need to put our nose down, get to work, and generate original data that's clearly reported. And I think the more we do that, the closer we are to that future that you described, which we will get to. It's just a matter of how long it'll take.
Well said. Dr. De Souza, anything to add to that?
No, I agree. I think I stay in between you both perspective, but it's interesting. We all
very diplomatic.
Agree. The field you get better down the line, right? We agree that.
Yes.
And again, just look the first paper I published was in 2007, Journal Strength Conditioning Research, almost 2 decades. My first publication. And when I look, yes, we use mixed model. I got lucky because my mentor wrote a paper for Medicine Science Sport Exercise criticizing the use of ANOVA in 2004. But nobody read the paper. We should have used mixed model. In 2004, Carlos was talking about that. Carlos taught me about coding on SAS. I used SAS in 2006. But when I look reporting from that paper, it's like, man, I think I'm getting better, right? Because that I think we all we see the field getting better. Yes, there always gonna be bad studies. But again, I think we can catch those in the sensitivity analysis. I agree for that. And I think the last thing I want to touch with was a nice perspective or finding. We always had the idea about the inverted U, and if it does exist, the current data does not support that idea, right? It's probably a higher number, and probably we cannot capture. And I love the point. Your questions, Eric, is the questions for a true scientist. We literally, are we doing these things right? Can we capture what we want to measure? And that's a question we should, every study we join or start to conduct, those are legit questions. A true scientist cannot lose them. You cannot lose sight from those questions. I love your perspective. I agree. Kind of disclosure point. Every study I started, my bias was higher volume is going to be better.
For sure. I mean, it's the dose, right? And I think one of the big disconnects between volume research and what happens in the real world, from my observations as a competitor and a coach, and just being in the gym a long time, is that many times when people increase volume, something else gives. And in a lab, we're very intentionally saying we're fixing everything and increasing sets. So yeah, of course we have to maintain the same exercise selection. We're not going to go, oh crap, I can't do squats again, I'm going to do leg press. Of course we have to keep the rest period the same. We're not going to go, God, I'm so tired from 16 sets. Can't I just get 5 minutes in the bathroom? Sorry, like we have to maintain the rest period. Oh, I got to drop load. Well, only if the RIR is there or whatever way that we're controlling for that aspect. So I think what we see in the real world is the effect of what I would describe as pacing, right? Is that when you increase volume, there is a point, depending upon what people are acclimated to, pain tolerance, motivation. And I mean that from a very big picture, like what is their motive for what they're doing? Like you have to be able to justify, why am I here 3 hours? Am I going to actually maintain everything else the same when I increase the dose? Because that's the only way to observe that in the real world. So I do suspect that the inverted U happens earlier in real life compared to what happens in a study. And that is, I think, a really important thing to understand is the difference between how this study, which is telling us a concept rather than a direct or a directive for how many sets to do. So yeah, those are all critical aspects. And just because we understand the directionality and the shape of a relationship, it doesn't directly inform what we necessarily should be doing in the gym in all cases. So those aren't new messages for many in the mass audience, but I think it's really good to hear it from another perspective. And it's also good to hear it from someone who has been literally in the trenches conducting a good chunk of the high volume research. I think the final question that I have for you, Dr. De Souza, is what are you most excited about in our field? That could be something that your lab is doing or just generally. And where do you think our efforts should be put to move the needle in a positive direction?
That's a great question. I mean, I reading to we got to improve the quality of the things you're doing, reporting, and that and now that's something I keep studying. I read more studies about methods and stats than actual studies about volume or protein. Sorry, so because that helps me more, I think, become a better researcher. So I think that the self-awareness of I want to see scientists more concerned and question themselves about, am I doing this right? Can I capture what I want to measure? Can the things you pointed out? So that's something that makes me excited, because I see some young talents in our field. I don't want to be unfair with anyone. I'm not gonna cite names, but I see like a young generation of scientists in our field, kind of concerned about things we were not back, right? I see those guys where they're talking about such a young age. I'm like, man, I was so stupid when I was the same age. So the we had a young generation that excites me big time. That's see young talents concerned about methods, about quality. That makes me excited. I don't know if I'm excited about studying hypertrophy anymore.
I got enough excitement for everybody in the room. Don't you worry about it.
Yeah. So I am excited about a new project we're doing. Again, this big data with the multiple labs. I'm excited about it. Something you mentioned, and I made a challenge. I'm gonna make the same challenge again. I do agree we need to do more multi-center studies. My lab is open. Count on me. Let's do it. My lab, everything I have is open. So then we can advance and doesn't matter my position in the paper. I want to answer good questions and advance the field. This is it. So do you want to use it? Put in my name, whatever you think is appropriated, but let's do something between the labs. I think it's time to do that. It is, again, it's good to think about getting older at this point. I don't need to publish anymore. I'm not concerned about that. I don't concern about fame, money. What excites me is advancing the field, for sure. I think that's done through improving methods and the way you're doing. Again, we are conducting the sleeping study. And
what does that consist of?
Huh?
What does that consist of? Tell us about that.
The idea was, so I think it was you. I think it was some of you was mentioned about transparency and also maybe submitting the RB proposal, because I might to change the things based on the data, because the initial idea was all the studies about sleeping artificially manipulate sleeping, right? They restrict people, and you don't know how long it takes for you to adapt for the restriction. And what we decided was, Carlos and I, with the students, we have like a bright young group. And okay, let's separate. It's a no randomized control trial. One part's a no randomized control trial. It separates short from normal sleepers. And the threshold was 5 hours. We kept everybody blinded. So during the study, we did not open the accelerometer data, whatever. My accelerometer does not track. I cannot track with like a sleeping phases, REM sleep, for example. But in the secondary question was, can exercise dosage mitigate a potential negative effect of poor sleeping? So it's a no randomized control trial with a within subject design, randomized 3 sets, 1 set per leg.
Got it.
So
if you're not sleeping well enough, just do more training. That'll feel great.
that was the idea. But why I might need to change is that I didn't get enough short sleepers. We ended up we started for 33. We ended up with a 27. We have a 10 more again, or 15 more. What I submitted, and again, I'm telling those things because when I publish the paper, I'm going to disclose all those things. Because if I don't get enough short sleepers, I might do a mixed model and use the sleeping time as a covariate and see what happens. That's what the students submitted for the European Congress. So it's a project, again, I'm learning because I started to read more about sleeping, track sleeping. It's always cool when you're learning something new. But yeah.
If you look at hours of sleep in a continuous fashion, would that perhaps enable you to?
We did like, for example, for the big data, the volume project, we analyze everything as a continuous variable. We did for sleeping hours and for sets, we did. So then to compare, we did a different approach. We did a Z transformation, and then you talk about units of a standard deviation change. The data, I can send over the abstract. The data is promised, like it's just a tiny part of the monster we are working on at this point. But yeah, man, I think those are the things exciting me. Improving the field to, like Trexler said, doing the grind, go there and collect data, learn from mistakes, keep doing the data collection, and try to answer the right questions the field needs is what excites me. Yeah.
Love it. And little hint, maybe a little preview. Do you think sleep matters as much as we think it does? Or do you think it maybe is within a certain range, it doesn't make a big difference in the short term? Any hints there on the data yet?
I think it goes back to volume. I don't think it's just about quantity. There is something about quality. My anecdotes. I'm still sleeping. When the kids were younger, I wasn't asleep at all. And then I talked to a good friend, big time researcher, Hamilton Rochelle from Brazil. Hamilton and Bruno Gualano, they did a lot of things for creatine, whatever. And then I was talking to Hamilton, like, man, I'm struggling. Like, I'm not sleeping well. And he was very honest. Yeah, the data is not as strong for performance, but try creatine. I know if it was a placebo, I'm still sleeping the same amount of hours, 5 to 6, but training is getting better. Again, the quality. I also less stress about life and things as well. I think was at the time when my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer. Was a lot of things going on. So I think the way it is right now, just looking at sleeping hours, I don't know if it's practical relevant. But we gotta. That's something I want to do. If I do a follow-up study, I might do it. It's gonna be able to track not just hours, but quality and maybe external factors as a potential confounding covariate. Like, can we have a survey as a stress or something? Just having that.
Like Bartholomew has data on number of perceived stressful events and the effect on strength.
So because my perspective, Helm, is like if someone is sleeping 7 hours, not quality, stress out about life, and so compare someone is sleeping 5, good nutrition, more relaxed in the different. Maybe the 5 hours guy may have a better outcome. I don't know. Like how long we need to capture those things. I know it's cliche, but every study we start, we ended up with more questions, and that's where I am now. Like, I think there is something about quality we're not looking at yet.
Yeah, and sleep is one of those interesting things. I was kind of down a sleep rabbit hole a while ago, and it's easy to say, oh, everyone's different, genetics, etc. But we actually know the genes that make a person able to really function optimally with 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night. Like, these people are among us, and we know the gene they carry, right? So that's one of the challenges with these studies, especially with small samples, is like, are your short sleepers the people who wanted to sleep more, and life got busy and they are just sacrificing 3 hours a night? Or are they the people who are going to be sleeping 5 hours a night no matter what? So that's one thing. And then another thing.
We could even do Mendelian randomization on this if we wanted to.
Should be able to, yeah. But another thing that will kind of come into play is, you know, you look at studies where they cross-sectionally look at people who are sleeping less, and what they find is higher sleep efficiency. And so then you're like, well, okay, what is the trade-off there? How much can we really, if I am someone who should be getting 7.5 a night, and I cut that to 6, can I make up for that with better efficiency? Where's the line there? Where's the balance? And I think that gets directly to what you're referring to in terms of just that quality trade-off. And I know for me, when I'm exercising more, my sleep efficiency subjectively seems so much better. So I'm really intrigued to see what you find.
Yeah, and I'm gonna use sleep efficiency. I have the metric. I'm gonna use that as a covariate as well.
Nice.
Carlos and I, we are bouncing off ideas. Again, like we don't have as many short sleepers, and I'm gonna be very transparent. That's how we submit it. And maybe I can make a supplemental material. That was how you submit it. Was a no randomized controlled trial, short normal sleepers. We didn't find those shorter sleepers here at UT. But yeah,
I have an idea for you.
Yeah, I'm open.
Assuming that you don't have any strong feelings about ethics, here's what you do. You make your next cohort of students do the study and give them the hardest semester they've ever seen in their entire life. These kids are up until 2 a.m. studying every night, and all of a sudden, you got a whole new batch of short sleepers.
I like this idea, Trexler. That's a good one.
It's easy.
That's a great idea, yeah.
Awesome.
But,
well, hey, Dr. De Souza, I wanted to say thank you for the time you've already given us. I know we've been at it for about an hour and a half already. Unless there's anything else you want to close on, the floor is yours. I want to just give people the opportunity. I know you're not huge on social media, but you are present. If people are more interested in your thoughts, your findings, your work, what's the best place for people to follow that?
Oh, yeah, Instagram is where I have been more active. Is my last name, desouza.eo. I think it's Dr. desouza.eo. You can find me on Instagram. No, I had such a great time here. It was very nice discussion. And thank you so much for the opportunity, for opening up the space. And listen to this old grumpy man talk about science and his perspective. I really appreciate, guys. The time was, I had fun.
Perfect. And so did we. So thank you so much. Trex?
All right. Well, yeah. On behalf of the Iron Culture, thanks so much, Dr. De Souza. That does it for our episode tonight. We will be back in exactly 7 days. Everyone have a fantastic week, and we will see you very soon.